Hey friends, Jeff here with a new episode of Conversations Life Science Leaders Aren't Having. Today we welcome to the show George Magrath. George is CEO at Ocuphire Pharma. At Ocuphire, they are doing revolutionary work. They are a clinical stage company that is working on a treatment for diabetic retinopathy that eventually causes blindness in the patients. George has a unique story because he's had conversations as a doctor with patients with diabetic retinopathy who were going to go blind. And now he's in the seat of CEO at a company that is looking to halt that or at the very least slow it down. Who George is to me is stewardship. And we talk about that word in our conversation. George takes very seriously his role as steward of the science he's been handed, the funding that the company's been provided, and the team that he has to be able to deliver an effective and safe treatment for retinopathy in diabetic patients. I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation with George Magrath. George Magrath, welcome to the show. Really excited to have you to dive into your world and all the things that are happening. So first, hearty welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. It's great to be here, and I appreciate you having me.
Oh, you're welcome. So I just did a brief introduction of you and who you are to me. Would love for you to start us off and bring us current. What's up in your world?
Yeah, currently I'm at Ocuphire, where we're working on an oral treatment for diabetic retinopathy. So it's really, really an interesting program. Diabetic retinopathy is the leading cause of blindness in America. And right now there are 6 approved treatments, but they're all used sort of after patients have lost vision. We're really trying to shift the paradigm and trying to slow that progression of vision loss or hopefully prevent the progression of vision loss. And so it's a big problem. It's a paradigm shift for ophthalmology. It's great science. It's a great team, and it's a lot of fun.
And you've had an amazing journey, which I want to dig into because I think there's some fascinating insights through that. But I'll just jump to Ocuphire and why this and why now?
Yeah, so great question. So this is transformational, right? So what we're doing at Ocuphire is not an incremental improvement. It's not anything short of being a transformational paradigm shift in how we treat patients in ophthalmology. And it really is kind of crazy to me that the normal state of ophthalmology is we see diabetics once a year and we tell them that they have diabetic retinopathy and they're at risk for vision loss, but we don't have anything to do for them. And so we say, just come back in a year, do the best you can and control your diabetes. It's going to be so amazing if we're able to get a treatment, whether it's Ocuphire's or somebody else's. Just having something to offer those patients would be amazing because it really does. I mean, obviously impacts people's lives big time because it's a bilateral. If diabetic eye disease affects both eyes, it affects people in their working age, 40s and 50s, and it leads to severe vision loss. So it's the kind of problem that I want to tackle, right? So that's why I'm at Ocuphire, is because there's good science and good data that are going after a big problem, and it's also the right time in my life, right? I've spent the past number of years, building teams, executing clinical trials, doing drug development, and now it's really nice to be really attacking with a really all-star team what is the biggest unmet need in ophthalmology right now.
And it absolutely draws me into your story because if I just pause and think of all the CEOs, whether they were clients or guests on the show, you are one of a kind. And what I mean by that is you have been and still are at various degrees, depending on your capacity, a practicing ophthalmologist. So you're not a CEO that was on Wall Street alone or on the management track for decades and decades. You have had the conversation the conversation you just described in surveying and treating a patient with diabetes. You've actually had that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm wondering, and feel free to just dive into your story of all that has led to this point, but you're one of a kind. In that context is just the very visceral connection with that conversation with a patient.
Sure. Yeah. No, I've seen it, right? Like you said, I've had that conversation probably thousands of times at this point. And honestly, I've had patients who I've seen and followed for diabetic retinopathy who've lost vision in both eyes, right? So I've experienced that from the physician's seat and seen how impactful, that is on patients. So my story is crazy. It's different for sure. But yeah, but the thread through my story is that I've always just chased what I thought was the most intellectually interesting and the most impactful way I could spend my time. And so that's led me to where I am. And I'm really grateful that it's led me to where I am. It started all the way back in college, right? I started off in accounting and ended up in biochemistry. And so it's probably the only person at Clemson to end up with a major in biochemistry and a minor in accounting. But it was because I just started taking the science classes and I enjoyed them. But I also enjoyed the accounting stuff. So it probably makes me a pretty big nerd, but that's okay. So I went from there to med school, loved med school. And then after med school, when I was in my general surgery internship, I did my MBA at that point. So I did my MBA at night on weekends. And then I did my residency in ophthalmology. And after that, decided to do a fellowship in what's called ocular oncology, which is cancers in and around the eye. And I did that because there was nobody I'm from South Carolina, so there's nobody in South Carolina that was doing that. We used to have to send our patients to Philadelphia, and it was pretty difficult for people to travel that far for treatment. And so the university there worked out an agreement for me to go up and train in Philadelphia and bring that back to South Carolina. While I was in Philadelphia, that's when I did my degree in economics, my master's in economics, and went on to start working for a firm in New York as an equity analyst. And that started out just because it was pretty fun. I always loved new trials, new innovations. And so it was literally on nights and on weekends, I would write research reports for a place called Edison Investment Research. And I did that for several years before I truly got into drug development, which was at a company called Hovione. So Hovione was a Portuguese-owned family company that was a contract drug manufacturer. So it was around 2,000 chemical engineers, and they specialized in making drug for anybody from Pfizer to tiny biotechs. And so my job at the time is I was part of a team that was tasked to look through their proprietary products that their chemists were working on and develop those into the clinic and for patients. And so we had assets in dermatology, ophthalmology, and inhalation. Had a lot of fun with that, and we developed a number of those through clinical trials, and eventually got to a point where we out-licensed those, or we were in the process of out-licensing them when I left. and joined a company called Lexitas. Lexitas, I was a client of Lexitas for probably 7 years at Hobune. They ran all of our ophthalmic studies. They're a company, they're a clinical research organization, contract clinical research organization that specialized in running ophthalmic trials. I thought their job was so cool. They got to be involved in a lot of different clinical trials, and they got to actually execute them. And so I joined there as their CMO. About 6 months in, 4 months in, they promoted me to CEO of that company. We were 35 people at the time, and we grew it to around 200 people. And at any one time, we were running 40, 50 clinical studies in ophthalmology. It was a lot of fun. I mean, we just built a great team there, and we got to be involved in some of the best innovation in ophthalmology. And it came to a time where we needed more infrastructure, and the needs of the company changed, right? They needed less of an ophthalmic expert at the helm, and they needed more of a traditional managerial team, right? To manage the growing mass of what Lexitas had become. And so we got help with that, and we were very fortunate to partner with QHP Capital and their team, who specializes in the operational aspects of clinical research. And so they built out a fantastic team that's continuing on at Lexitas, and giving the team the support that they need from a more traditional sort of management team. And so that led me to Ocuphire, which I was able, they shared their data with us early on after they got it, just because a lot of companies did that just to get our opinion on what they were seeing and how they reviewed the data and that kind of stuff. And I thought it was really great at the time. And the stars sort of aligned, right, where this was a super cool project. And the same time I was transitioning out of Lexitas, they were looking for some help. And so I was able to join. And so I joined in November. And since then, it's been wonderful, right? We built out the executive team. We brought on the right people. It was a great executional team to start with, and we've really hit our stride there. So that the team has really taken off, and we're looking forward to a lot of really great things from the execution as we go. Mm-hmm. And the last part about my practice is, when I came back from Philadelphia, I did start in ocular oncology and medical retina, that sort of practice, and saw patients, right? I just enjoyed seeing ophthalmology patients of all varieties. And so I titrate that up and down based on what else I'm doing in life. So right now it's pretty minimal, but it's a big part of what I love doing. And so I continue it. That's the real reason.
So there's so much in your story, and I'm actually find myself drawn to the time in your journey as an equity analyst. And I'm wondering maybe you didn't know it then, but you're tapping into it now. What do you remember, or what were some key things that you learned then that are adding value today?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it wasn't a planned thing, right? It was just I enjoyed doing them, and so it really wasn't a really well thought out career plan that I put together. It was just that I had fun doing this kind of stuff, and I had a young family, and it was a good night job for me at the time. so that was a big piece of it too, why I did it. But I learned a whole lot about the industry there, right? So I basically got to watch from the sidelines, right? As an equity analyst, you get to talk to the companies, you see what they're doing, you watch how they progress, you watch their moves and what they're doing. And you really learn a lot, because you see a lot of different companies, you see a lot of different people, you see a lot of different perspectives, and they're all a bit different about how they approach it. And so that part really is kind of like a crash course, because you get a front row seat to a lot of different companies instead of, so it's different because you're not you're not in one company, right? You're with a lot of companies. And I got out of it honestly because of the difference with being an equity analyst versus being in a company too, which is as an equity analyst, being with a lot of companies, you also aren't truly a part of any of them. So you never really have your own product and you never really have your own development plan. And so it was a great crash course for me to watch a lot of different professionals that were wonderful at their jobs and how they did it. And then I was fortunate enough to have an opportunity that kind of came out of the blue at a Panera Bread one day that I was able to actually jump in on my own project.
Yeah, and you're pointing to, having something of your own, so to speak, quote unquote. It's not your own, but there's lots of people involved. But something to really one thing to dive into. You talked about your time in clinical research, and now at Ocuphire. I'm wondering, this idea of stewardship that kind of comes up for me of really owning or taking stewardship of a ship, of a cause. First they're at Lexitas, and then even your previous stop, and now at Ocuphire. How do you see your role as a steward of these of the missions that you've been a part of?
Oh, sure. It's a great question. I think it hits at the core of my management philosophy too. So I'll talk about my team first when I tackle that, because what I try to do with my team is I drive ownership and decision making into the team. So my goal is for the people on my team to own their part of the project, own their decisions, and be free to act like that. Right. I know that when I hire people, I hire them to be experts at whatever it is, CMC, non-clinical, clinical. That's what they're there for, is because they're the best person to do the job in that seat. And so I try to give them the freedom to do that. And with that freedom comes the ownership and the accountability that comes along with that. And so that's something that our offsite last week with our team, we talked a lot about was that it's, we want everybody to feel empowered. We want everybody to truly have their part of the, they're part of the overall, but to truly have ownership of their area. I believe that's key, right? To any high functioning, highly efficient organization. And we did that at Lexitas too. That's exactly what we did at Lexitas. So personally, I see my job as the steward of that. As a CEO, my job is really to put the right people in place and have the right strategy for them to succeed. Right. So it's, my job is to set the vision and strategy for the company. And then after the people are in place to execute against that, my job shifts to supporting them, right? Making sure that they have what they need to execute, that they have the right company culture, they have the right guardrails in place, they have the right vision, and they have the right infrastructure to be able to execute against their job. And so I spend a lot of time trying to figure that part out and make sure that we do that in the right way. And the last aspect of stewardship is we are stewards, and in a company, we are stewards of a lot of different things, right? So we're stewards of fantastic science that's been developed by a lot of great researchers over the years. And we have to shepherd that through to try to give it as fair a shot as possible to prove whether or not it helps patients. We're also stewards of capital that's been entrusted to us, right? And so that's something that's very sacred, right? People believe in us enough that they place their capital with the idea that we're going to be able to create something really great out of it. And so those are, there are a lot of other stakeholders that have that have entrusted us with different aspects. And so that's really a great privilege and honor to be a part of.
And stewardship, or thinking about it in that way, is a unique mindset. You might, if you were to pull, a room full of life science professionals, maybe you'll get one or two that would use either that word or the spirit of that word. What does it translate into in when you see yourself as a steward of the science, of the finances, of the people? What does that translate into on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis for you?
Oh, it creates a gravity to the decision making process, right? And so it creates a culture where we um we do everything in our power to get it right. We don't always get it right, but we do everything in our power to get it right because there are a lot of people entrusting in us, right? And so I think that probably is common amongst all life science people, but that's what that translates to me is that every decision matters, right? When we decide to do a study, um, patients will be affected by that. The science will be affected by that, whether or not we're running the right study. Um, the capital markets are affected by that because they're the ones who have entrusted their capital with us. And so really a lot of different people are trusting us to make the right decision, and it adds a gravity to it that's very important to keep in mind. And,
Mm.
and that guides our everyday decisions because we tend to be very, very deliberate, thoughtful, right? We do move fast because we are a small company, but at the same time, it's the decisions are not weighed lightly, right? We value expert opinions. We value really thoughtful dialogue. We value open dialogue where people are willing to challenge each other because at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is getting it right.
Mm.
Um, so that's what we're after.
Mm.
That's how I see it, at least.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, I really respect that. And the word, use the word gravity, weight to an importance of what you're doing. I'm wondering how then does the how does failure fit into that? Because you're in the science business, you're developing drugs, yeah, and you're testing ideas, and you're going to fail. Things are going to fall short. So I'm wondering, with the weight that you just described of getting things right, how do you balance that with the natural course of the process where failure is there? How do you find the balance between both of those, getting it right and the inevitability of failure?
Well, there's two types of failure, right? There's failure that's outside of our control, which is the scientific stuff and the fact that we run experiments for a living, right? So we are going to fail for that. And that aspect, I see my job as, my job is at the core essence of it. My job is not to get a drug approved. My job is to give a drug a fair chance to prove whether or not it's efficacious and safe for people, right?
Mm.
And so if I am able to run the best trial possible and we execute it flawlessly and it turns out that the science didn't work, then that's failure and it hurts, but it's okay, right? I mean, that's part of the game. And that's what we do for a living. There's a second type of failure, which is failure to make the correct decisions that are in our control. That's not tolerable, right? That's the one that I've been a part of plenty of it, and that's the one that hurts the most, and that we try to avoid the most. And that's failure where we as a team make an incorrect decision that leads to a less than optimal outcome. And it's tough, right? When that happens. So we we do our best to mitigate that by a number of different methods, getting the right people on the bus, getting the right expertise, giving everybody a say at the table, and really deliberating about this stuff. But it still happens, right? And it's just normal course of human nature and business, and we work through it the best we can. But that's how I see it.
Yeah. And it's, I can imagine and granted, you do have a small team, but as your team gets bigger, this being results focused, and that the only measure of success is that end result is very much on the minds of a lot of people. But you're pointing us, and I imagine you're pointing your team to the process. Now, there's results along the way, the safety and efficacy along the way. You have markers, results, so to speak. But how do you, as a leader, help your people focus on that process, as opposed to that the only measure of success is the ultimate result?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, huge point. Yeah. So the process is almost everything. So we are, this is actually a lot of what I've been doing at Ocuphire, is implementing the processes that will allow us to make the correct decision in all different aspects, rather than having just less structured decision making, right? And so we are big sticklers of the process, because the process will protect you in most cases, right? If you have a great process and you follow it, you will likely succeed. It's the same thing in surgery, right? When I'm doing surgery, there are steps to the surgery, and you follow those steps. And if you follow those steps, you are very likely to have a good outcome from surgery. Same thing with the recipe, right? Steps to cooking. So we're big believers in that. We do focus on the process. We're sticklers to that. And that's a big part of what my job is, because the normal sort of entropy of the company is to revert to, let's just get it done right now. And we have to fight against that. That's the Lexitas story is big on that. So when we were 35 people, everybody just did everything. There were very few processes. We just got the job done, and we did a good job at that, but it wasn't scalable, right? We were tapped out with the number of hours with the people that were there. And to go past about 35 people, once you get past around 50 or so people, it's hard to even track what people are doing all day, right? At 35 people, you know what everybody's doing all day. You kind of are close-knit, tight. Once you get much bigger than that, it's all about the process. And it's all about creating a process that you're able to replicate, that you're able to do and trust. And we built a lot of that at Lexitas. I think that's how we were able to scale like we were and still have the quality that we had at the time.
I'm wondering, you talked about your world as CEO now at Ocuphire. I would imagine part of your job is to educate investors, potential investors, that community of stakeholders, about what you're up to and the importance of the process. Because, if I think of myself as an investor in a stock, all I care about, to be honest, is either the dividend or the gain in value. And I'm wildly uneducated on most of the companies that I'm invested in. What's your approach to educating those stakeholders, that investor community, around the importance of your process?
Yeah, well, you're exactly right. I mean, at the end of the day, my job is to create shareholder value, and we do that by creating good medicines, right? Great medicines. And so I spend a ton of my time communicating, right, with all different stakeholders. And that is a lot of my job. And that's probably part of what my background makes me good at, is that I can, I truly do, understand the disease process, how the physician perceives the patient, experience, what the physician experience is, and the drug development process. And so I understand these processes and these different stakeholders really well, which allows me to communicate at a level that is hopefully effective when I am doing that. Communicating the process is really important because if you are going to entrust us with your capital, right, and you are trusting us to be stewards of that capital, you want to know that we are going to do everything in our power to create value with that. And that's what the process does, right? It gives anybody reassurance that you know what we're doing, that we're doing something that's highly predictable, highly reliable, and highly efficient. And so that's what we try to communicate, and what we try to do every day, and hopefully the communication just is as much me telling people as it is people seeing what we're doing.
And as you said, your job is communication, largely, whether it be external stakeholders or your team. And I'm wondering, the other element of communication that I imagine is so important is the idea that you mentioned before of why you're even there at Ocuphire, which is you're on the precipice of something revolutionary. This is a paradigm changer. This is an incremental change. This is a paradigm shift. And I'm wondering, what's your unique approach to conveying the mission and the why as you're enrolling team members, and again, as you're enrolling the investor community in what you're doing?
Yeah. So first of all, you're exactly right. I'm here because we're trying to do something revolutionary, right? We're not there's nothing incremental about what we're doing. And I love it that way. That's what I want. The way to communicate that really is to break it down to first principles. I think that's what you have to do for some of these things that are, if we were doing a longer lasting drug or whatever, those are easy to understand. You know what the market is. You can really model it. It's pretty straightforward. When you're doing something that nobody has really done before, you have to really explain it. And by breaking it down to the first principles of it, you really get down to the core, which for most things is pretty simple, right? And so first principles of what we're doing is that we don't think it's normal to just watch somebody with disease for a decade until they go blind, right? We just don't think that that's the way it should be for patients. And we think that you can create a lot of value by solving for that. And the second core principle is that we have biology that we're working on that has been validated in the eye, right? It's the same mechanisms that people are using treated with intravitreal injections that work. So we have science that we think is very validated. And then the third core principle is that we have a team that are experts at executing against this. And so it comes down to really simple things, right? Where we have a real need in the market that's obvious. We have science that we believe in, and we have a team that literally has done this, fire drill before. So it's a pretty powerful thing. And if you build those first principles, I mean, what I try to do at least is I build those first principles and then I build up from there, right? So you set that first principle that, hey, it's not normal to watch people go blind from diabetic retinopathy. Okay, then what is the treatment paradigm now? How should we adjust it? How do you go from there? For the second pillar, this is great biology we believe in. Okay, well, show us the studies where you've proven that, and we can go through that detail by detail. But I think you do have to break it down to just the core principles of what you're doing and why you're doing it.
I would imagine and I don't know if you have open recs or you're hiring in different roles, but even as I'm just listening, I have this feeling like I want to be part of what you're doing. I'm not sure what that would be or how that would look. Um, and so taking it out of, from my perspective, just I would imagine that there are those who hear those three core principles and they say to themselves or say to you explicitly, George, I want to be part in some way of what you're doing. Are you having those kind of conversations?
Yeah, yeah, we are. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that most of our team is here. I mean, people can find a job in a lot of places, right? I mean, if it was just about finding a job, there are a lot of things you can do that take less of your time or less, stressful, things like that. But our team really does believe it, right? We're here to do something great. I mean, I had a conversation with one of the other Ocuphire team members like a couple weeks ago when they were coming on. I was like, the conversation was something like, look, if you got to go to work every day, you might as well go to work and do something that's impactful, right? And figure out how you can make the biggest difference on people while you're at work. And I think that that's sort of is the view of a lot of people is, hey, we could go be a scientist at any number of life science companies, but if we're gonna do it, we so much more fun, so much more fulfilling to do it in a way that is impactful, that makes a difference, and is with a team that you like to work with, right? That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. It again, it's unique. My work and this podcast is mostly with smaller organizations, and I do experience a lot of passion and a lot of energy around their mission, as you're describing what you guys have. And a common observation is there's a level of urgency because of the mission. There's a level of urgency. You talked about getting it right. So this is another element. There's a level of urgency that is uncommon, that people act with, that may not be acted with in an organization where the mission isn't as strong. Do you experience that, whether you're driving it yourself or just it's self-generated by the mission? What are you observing around urgency because of this powerful mission that you have?
Oh, 100%. So it's there is a lot of urgency, right? We have to go efficiently, we have to go quickly, and we have to get it right. I mean, it's like, and that's what makes it tough, right? I mean, it's like the three legs of the stool that are hard to all have, right? It's always hard to have, be capital efficient, be on time, and have the highest quality. Usually one of those suffers. Either you go quick and cheaply, or you go slow and expensively, or something like that. But we don't have that. We don't have that luxury, right? We don't. And there's a practical aspect of it, and then there's a missional aspect of it. The mission is that we're in a company like Ocuphire because we want to do something, right? We want the freedom, we want the ability to move fast and make a difference. And then the practical aspect of it is, yeah, we don't have the same kind of capital that Pfizer has. So we can't act like that, right? If we want to stay around, we have to keep moving fast, and we have to keep generating value every day. So it's the fun part of this job. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm an old project manager. That was my first professional act. And we used to call it, still do, triple constraint. You have budget, you have scope, which includes quality, and you have schedule. And I remember I would go into a sponsor's office and I would say, okay, here's the triple constraint. Pick two. Because I can't
have all three.
I can't do all three. But what I hear you saying is, you as stewards, that you are driving at all three. So I'm wondering, the name of the show is Conversations Life Science Leaders Aren't Having. Take us into a conversation, whether with your CFO or your COO or whomever, about managing that triple constraint and saying, yeah, I realize getting to 2 is possible. All 3 is difficult. What are the conversations around that triple constraint?
Sure. So I'll give you an example of that. So really, the way I get around the triple constraint, or the way that I approach the triple constraint, is again by going back to first principles. What are we trying to do as a company, right? What exactly are we trying to do? And right now at Ocuphire, we're trying to prove whether or not this drug works. So as a small company, because we don't have the resources that you would have at a big company, what we do is we say, okay, what's the most efficient way to get to the answer of whether or not this has biologic activity? And everything else gets pushed back. So what we're saying is that there's a lot of work that has to be done before a drug can get approved, right? There's a whole lot of ancillary testing, other clinical studies, CMC work, all that kind of stuff that has to get done. But what we have a discussion about is, okay, what of that do we need to do to feel like we're going to put our clinical trial in the best position for success? And all the other stuff can wait until after that, because what we can do is, if we know the drug works, then the cost of capital gets a lot lower, and we can then take the time to go back and build the complete package for the FDA. And so we're not, so that's a conversation, right? We're not cutting corners or anything like that, but we're just prioritizing what is it that we need to answer? What question do we need to answer? And that leads us in a that gets you a good balance, right, of the triple constraint.
Well, I can say you would be my favorite sponsor in my old world of project management, because what I hear you doing is exactly what I wished my project sponsor would do, is narrow the scope from a prioritization standpoint to the most important thing.
Mm-hmm.
And with that being done, then yes, I can manage with the budget you've given me and the time that I have, because you've given me a priority. And so I love the focus that you're giving your team and really aiding them to be able to manage those constraints. It's really, really cool.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah.
So the name of the show, George, is Conversations Life Science Leaders Aren't Having. If you got to prescribe or wave a wand over the offices of all your peer CEOs in the life sciences to have one conversation that they're not presently having or not having enough of, what's that one conversation you want to invite them to have?
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people are having this conversation. I think it's becoming more and more popular, but the idea of value-based medicine. So when we create medicines, the way the world should work is that when you create a medicine, the company is rewarded for the value they add to the patient's life at the end of the day, right? Whatever that is. There are a lot of medicines out there that may be disproportionately, priced, basically. And what I would love to see is for our entire industry to get around a construct where the best science that makes the most impact on the day-to-day life of people is what's rewarded every time. Right? Because that's what will drive innovation and drive investment and drive people towards the things that matter most at the end of the day, which is helping people's day-to-day lives. So that's what I care a lot about. That's what I think that the industry is moving more towards, and I'm really happy to see it. And I think that if we have such firepower, as an industry, and the ability to to innovate. That if we direct it towards the big problems, then we might actually solve some of them.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. The invitation to creativity and innovation in the industry. George, before we wrap, what would you love to highlight for us about what's happening at Ocuphire that you haven't already mentioned?
Yeah. Well, we're just a small company, tackling a big problem, and I would encourage, I would encourage you to reach out if you have any questions or comments about Ocuphire. We're always looking to improve. We're always looking for feedback. So any of your listeners that are that have any of that, please feel free to contact us. We're pretty much an open book, so it's all welcome.
Awesome. Well, we'll put Ocuphire's website, and if you're okay with it, your LinkedIn profile on the show notes that they can reach out. George, such a great conversation, so many great insights. I really appreciate you bringing all of yourself to this call.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. It was always great to talk, and thank you for doing this. Yeah.